Hi, this is Axel from dreamsanctuary.net. I am back with a new dream that I feel is important to present publicly. It's on the topic of the reddening, which is also known as the alchemical rubedo. But before we start, there are a few things that I want to go through. First, I made some minor modifications to the guidelines for dream interpretation. The changes are mostly about rewording and formatting, so I don't think there is a need to go through them. But if you notice that things are slightly different from the previous videos, that is the reason why. Second, I'd like to quickly go over some articles I've published recently. A while ago, a friend of mine sent me a dream which prompted me to write about active imagination. Thanks to that dream, I was able to outline some of the precautions that one should take before practicing active imagination. I also write about the differences between soul complexes, meaning the complexes that belong to us, because they are from the personal unconscious, and spirit complexes, which are the complexes that do not belong to us, because they are from the collective unconscious. Next, I've written an article about 3 concepts that interact with each other. I argue that, when we are in a time when the songlines are changing, a restoration must take place, and evil plays an important role in that restoration. I also wrote a summary of what I consider to be Robert Moore's most valuable contribution to depth psychology. I talk about grandiosity, the need for regulating archetypal energies, structural analysis, and the role of spirituality. And I've put out my longest article to date, which was published in 2 parts. It's about Satoshi Kon's Paranoia Agent, a 13-episode anime that is well worth watching and thinking about. Finally, I've put out some custom Dream Sanctuary notebooks. They are available in 4 color schemes, so if you want to buy a new notebook to do some dream work or journaling, check them out. With these announcements out of the way, let's go to the dream. This is a fairly recent dream, which I had mid-November 2022, and I've gave it the name, The Passion of Christ is the Mother Giving Birth. Here is the dream. I am inside the movie The Passion of the Christ. I am watching a scene where a bloodied Christ is pulling his cross from the right to the left. The cross is attached on him with strings that latches on his skin. The scene is so full of blood that it's hard for me to watch. But Jonathan Pajot, present next to me, says that he is not afraid of blood and strong symbolism from the unconscious. That's how it should be, otherwise it would be unnatural. At some point, Christ is propelled backwards, as if the cross and its latches were a slingshot. Despite this, he walks back to the place he was ejected from. When he arrives, his composure changes. He's looking at something, but it's off screen, to my left. I can't tell what it is. As he keeps looking at this glowing unknown, his many wounds are spontaneously healing. While this is happening, Pajot makes a speech about the fact that the blood marks of Christ are similar to the mother giving birth. Now that we've gone through the dream, we can talk about the key symbols and their associations. The Passion of the Christ is this movie by Mel Gibson, but I have not watched it, so I would associate it with being the bloodiest depiction of the Passion. That's what it's known for. For the cross, this quote came back to my mind, and it's a quote by Jung that says, "He must celebrate the Last Supper with himself, and eat his own flesh and drink his own blood." Is this perhaps the meaning of Christ's teaching, that each must bear his own cross? The next symbol is Jonathan Pajot, and I would associate him with being an authority on symbolism. The main symbol of the dream is blood, and I decided to amplify it. The easiest place to start was the red stage of the alchemical opus. Here is a quote from Jung, and I apologize in advance for the many mispronunciation, Latin or otherwise. The quote says, "Right at the beginning, you meet the dragon, the chthonic spirit, the devil, or as the alchemists called it, the blackness, the nigredo, and this encounter produces suffering. In the language of the alchemists, matter suffers until the nigredo disappears, when the dawn will be announced by the peacock's tail, and a new day will break, the leucosis or albedo. But in this state of whiteness, one does not live in the true sense of the word. It is a sort of abstract, ideal state. In order to make it come alive, it must have blood. It must have what the alchemists call the rubedo, the redness of life. Only the total experience of being can transform this ideal state of the albedo into a fully human mode of existence. blood alone can reanimate a glorious state of consciousness in which the last trace of blackness is dissolved, in which the devil no longer has an autonomous existence but rejoins the profound unity of the psyche. Then, the opus magnum is finished, the human soul is completely integrated. What this quote reveals is that the alchemical opus is comprised of three main stages. It starts with the blackness, the nigredo, sometimes followed by putrefaction, putrefactio. Then it goes into the albedo, the whiteness, and it ends up with the redness, the rubedo, sometimes preceded by yellowing, citrinitas. Now I need to emphasize that this is only a model. There's more operation. As I said, there's the yellow, there's the green, there's the gold, and more rarely there's the blue. And Jung warns us that the sequence of alchemical operation is arbitrary in its details and varies from author to author. What that means is when you look at an isolated alchemical text, you will likely find something different, maybe red, black, white. Nevertheless, the general order is black, white, and red. If you are interested in a complete illustration of the alchemical opus, I am soon going to release a video about the Cabala mineralis, where I go through each operation from beginning to end. Now for the personal context. I had this dream in November and it was by far the busiest month of the year. I was completely overwhelmed with work. I'm not going to list anything in particular because when I thought about what could have triggered this dream, nothing specific came to mind. So it must mean it was more of a generalized state of being overwhelmed, being busy, or having no time for myself. We can now go back to the dream moment by moment. The first moment is the setting, which is Christ's passion and it's full of blood. The feeling I have is between discomfort and horror. Discomfort is too light of a word and horror is too strong of a word. What is sure is that what I'm looking at is too intense, it's too graphic. I have to cover my eyes with my hands to bear what I'm looking at. Next, there's Pajot's explanation, and I have a feeling of a kind of uneasy acceptance, so I don't really like what I'm hearing but I accept it. But after this explanation, I'm more focused on what's happening in the dream. The next moment is the slingshot, and when Christ comes back, there's the healing mystery. And there's two feelings. There's a feeling of awe and wonder, but this is not mine. It's more like what's happening on the left, kind of off screen. What the ego feels in the dream is more being confused or feeling puzzled because I don't understand what's going on. And the last moment is the conclusion, where there's this explanation that the blood marks is equal to the birth. It's hard to put a label on the feeling I have in this moment, so maybe I would say I feel receptive to this new information. I don't oppose it. Now we can look at the story arc of the dream and its psychological significance. We start with the passion, which is the setting. In there we have Christ carrying the cross, and it can be understood as living fully one's own task. The passivity of the ego in this dream made me wonder if something was wrong with it. And the question came, should the ego be carrying the cross? But if the ego carries the cross, that means I would be identified with an archetypal task, and I think that's way more dangerous than the passivity that I show in this dream. So I think everything is fine in that regard. Next we have the very graphic symbolism, and it is explained in the dream as a natural, as an organic development. So we need not worry about this. The next moment is the slingshot, and I must say I don't fully understand it. I thought it was about regressive tendencies, like being pulled back, or maybe a sense of release, because when Christ is slingshot backwards, he's not attached to the cross anymore, so he can walk back normally. In any case, I don't fully understand that. The next part is the healing mystery, and this is really the outcome of the whole ordeal. So the passion, the blood, everything leads to this healing mystery. And the resolution of the dream states that the blood marks should be seen as birth pains. So this is my interpretation. To carry one's task is to bear one's cross, which also means to undergo a series of red transformations. In this context, red can mean painful or it can mean alive, so I'll let it at red. The point being is that the more you leave your task, the more life will shape you, And this is a mystery equivalent to the mother giving birth, or in psychological language, of a new attitude coming out from the unconscious. Now that we have an interpretation, we can go through the checklist to try to validate it or see if we made any mistake along the way. Quickly, I think I've demonstrated I'm taking the dream symbolically and not taking it literally. It taught me something completely new, which is the redness as being the mother giving birth. And this is something that's happening in the inner world and not something that's happening outside me. For the third point, it's a bit more difficult because this kind of religious symbolism is very hard to unpack in a balanced manner. But I would say that the dream was so full of blood and suffering that it prevents me from taking these matters too lightly. At this point, I consider the interpretation being valid, and so I would act on it. The problem here is I had 2 dreams in the same night after this Christ dream. The first one was something like I'm planning a trip to a very hard skiing spot. I'm not really decided on it, I simply want to get a sense of the trip. On the way there, I get laughed at by spirits or ghosts. Their mockery is about my naivety. The trip I am planning is too hard. Despite this, I walk the first bit, which goes downwards. I end up stopping very quickly and going back. It is indeed too difficult. So this dream emphasized the fact that this is simply too difficult, even just trying it. And it says this in 3 different manners. First, the ghost or spirits are laughing at me because I am underestimating the difficulty. Then the dream ego says it's too difficult. And also in the dream, while I'm planning the trip, I know that the trip is too long, too hard. This is why I'm simply trying to get a sense of the trip. So this really tempered my commitment to act. However, after this dream, I had another one, which said, I meet with a kind, positive female neighbor. So there's a sense of being supported, of carrying encouragement. So if the first dream said, don't do it, it's too hard, the second dream says, it's alright, you are supported. This is the reason I decided to honor the dream, and I consider the video to be part of this process, but I did not act on it. Now that we are done with the dream, I want to explore in more details the relationship between the rubedo and the birth of the mother. I found these 2 quotes which will help us to get us started. The first one is by Jung. The rubedo then follows direct from the albedo as the result of raising the heat of the fire to its highest intensity. The red and the white are king and queen, who may also celebrate their chemical wedding at this stage. And the second one is from Edinger, and he writes, here are the 3 color stages of the Coniunctio, the nigredo, the albedo, and the rubedo. And out of this sequential process, the spherical filius is born. At this point, if we know that the albedo is not the last operation, we realize that the rubedo is not the last operation either. It precedes a kind of birth. And so the red and the white contributes to some kind of inner wedding from which the spherical sun is born. And that spherical sun has a different name. It's named the lapis philosophorum, so the philosopher's stone, the filius philosophorum, the philosopher's child, the infant solaris, the sun child, the infans lunaris, the moon child, and sometimes the infans solaris lunaris, which means the sun moon child. And now we can understand why the dream says that the blood marks are the signs of the mother giving birth, because the son or the infant is born after the rubedo, after the wedding of the red and the white. We have now a last question, which is, what is this child waiting to be born? And I think we can find a partial answer in this talk by Jung. I am going to read what I consider to be the most relevant part, but the whole speech is worth reading, which you will be able to find at the end of the video or in the description box. The talk starts with, in the symbol of Christ lies an identification of the personality with the progressive tendency of the collective soul. This identification of the personality with the collective unconscious manifests itself always in the phenomenon of self-deification, be it an identification with the function of intuition, with the function of extraversion, or with the function of introversion. It is a self-deification according to the function, but the phenomenon always remains the same. It is therefore a question of the overcoming of self-deification, which might also be compared with the death of Christ, a death of the greatest agony. Perhaps the freeing of the personality from the progressive tendency of the unconscious belongs to one of the most painful tasks to be accomplished on the road to development to full individuality. Through the freeing of the personality from the progressive tendency arises a chaos, a darkness, and a doubt of all that exists and of all that may be. Only after one has freed oneself from the collective soul, only after one has passed through death and the soul has been realized, can the collective problem be really solved. This speech makes me want to put some final thoughts. The first one being that individuation is the recovery of the fragmented personality that is currently identified with the personal and collective unconscious. That means if we free those aspects, we're going to lose any kind of collective identity. So even the Jungian label has to be put into question. See, I don't think there's such a thing as an individuated Jungian. You cannot belong to a collective and be individuated. Now let me make this clear, I've got nothing against participating and contributing to a collective. This is the second half of individuation. As Jung said, the collective problem can only be solved once we have found our own individuality and we can express it to the collective. But being identified with the collective, that is a problem, because then the individual identity is no longer primary over the collective label. If we lose collective identity, what are we left with? What we are left with is with oneself. This is an experience of solitude of the ego with the unconscious, and not many people can handle this. Losing this identification and freeing the personality also means more actualization in time and space. I've left my mind wonder about this, and it came to me that this must necessarily be a painful process, because we are more fully exposed to existence, so we'll have deeper experiences and deeper feelings. This overcoming of self-deification, as Jung puts it, means that we'll become more humane, we'll have more of a human existence. So my last conclusion is that the rubedo is a painful and mysterious birthing task into actualization, which you could see as turning inside out. And it can be done in an internal manner or in an external manner. Which means if you don't do it internally, it's going to be relegated to an external process. In other words, if you don't do your inner work, it's going to show up outside. Either way, whether it's internal or external, this is going to be experienced as birth pangs. And as of 2022, I don't need to expand on the nature of these birth pangs, for everyone has been affected by it. In the past 2 years, we've seen a sharp distinction between the unconscious masses and people trying to stand up for themselves. And if you try to stand up for yourself, you've probably been ejected from multiple collective at once. So you've been ejected from society, you've been ejected from your work, and you might even be ejected from your family. In regards to what we've studied up to here, you might want to consider that this is part of the process of freeing the personality from identification with the collective soul. And I don't think there's a way back. I want to thank you for your attention. I hope you found this video informative, and you can stick around to read the talk I've quoted from, or otherwise you'll find a bunch more links in the description box.